Okay, so we want to welcome each of you to our first event, first FDC event in quite a while. We have not been inactive as a board. We've been very busy preparing our organization for our current reality, the reality in which we find ourselves with its many and varied attacks on conservatives and our values. First of all, we want to, as a board, thank you for your ongoing support of Freedom Defence Canada. Without you, we could not continue the work of informing and encouraging social conservatives and others who regularly benefit from our work. With that in mind, we'd like to inform you about some of the ongoing work and activities of FDC for you to participate in. As many of you are aware, we are fundraising for a speaker series, which will inform and equip you in the work of upholding conservative values, guarding our history from the revisionists, and restoring the battered Judeo-Christian foundation of this great nation. So please seriously consider a generous donation towards our speaker series. Our fundraising goal is $10,000, and the money we raise will help us decide the speakers that we invite and how many we will have. We also ask you to support our organization, Freedom Defence Canada, on social media. Go to our Facebook page, like, comment, and share the posts that you find there. Go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. There are a number of videos there of past teachers that we've had, lecturers. The more we engage and connect with others, the further the message can go in influencing others to consider the historical goodness and benefits of our nation's Judeo-Christian foundation. And finally, check out our website regularly. Read and comment on the posts that appear there, and encourage your friends and families to do the same and to join us and become members as well. We recognize, of course, that quite a few of you are already engaged and active, and not only with FDC, but other organizations as well. And we encourage you to keep that up. But we are asking you to encourage those around you to do the same as you are doing. You can be those firebrands that we need to get the message further and to help more people to become engaged in the fight for truth in this nation. As you are all painfully aware, we are living in an unprecedented time in our history where good is considered evil and evil good. There is a level of insanity that has captured many of our cultural and national institutions. Our trust in these institutions has been seriously damaged by bad leadership and evil agendas. Much of the discourse we hear in the public arena tends toward propaganda and is no longer just information for us to make our own decisions about. We have been a privileged people in the West for many years. Unlike many other places in the world, even today, we have not lived under the tyranny of evil regimes and governments. But sadly, things are changing in the West. There are many in our world who have experienced and lived through the horrors of oppressive regimes like the former Soviet Union, present-day communist China, and the many Eastern Bloc nations who fell under the direct control of communism in the 20th century. They have been warning us ever since then about the growing threat of authoritarian and totalitarian creep in Canada and many other Western nations. A number of excellent books have been written on this subject, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Warning to the West or The Gulag Archipelago, which despite their age are still highly relevant for our present time. One of the most significant books to come out in our time is one that we as a board have read and highly recommend to you, our supporters. It is entitled Live Not by Lies, a Manual for Christian Dissidents, and written by Dreher. Our event this evening uses Dreher's book as a reference point and a tool of resistance against the rising authoritarianism we are all beginning to feel in our daily lives. Christians and non-Christians alike now feel pressure to conform to woke ideology or be punished with cancellation, job loss, censorship, ostracization, and economic decline. Dreher's book and its recommendations can provide tremendous support and benefit for both Christian and non-Christian conservatives as we come to realize the nature of the current conflict and the way in which Western nations, now influenced by radical, woke, and progressive ideology, are becoming more and more authoritarian in their beliefs and practices. Dreher inspires us to use practical acts of courage and to create structures that we will need in future if the march towards totalitarianism continues as it almost certainly indicates that it will. Our two presenters this evening will draw from their personal experiences and lessons learned in Dreher's book to encourage all of us to stand firm and live not by lies. At this time, Perry will give us some instruction for the event. So, Perry.
Yes, hello. So I just want to go over some of the etiquette for the following event. Can we ask you to mute your mic during the presentations? After the presentation, we'll be having a question and answer session. I'll explain the details of how that will work when we get to that particular part of the event. But I think the most important thing is do mute your mics while we go along. Okay, Mike, back to Mike.
Okay, thank you, Perry. Our event tonight features a panel of two of our board members who will be speaking for about 15 minutes apiece. We will first hear from Perry Foster and then from Rick Higgins. So without further delay, giving them as much time as possible, I would like to introduce to you Perry Foster. So Perry, go ahead, please.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Thanks. So I want to reiterate that the main focus today is on Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, a manual for Christian dissidents. But I think it's also a manual for other people, anyone who has either conservative sense or has common sense or objects to what's happening to us at this particular time. So I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say that we've been on an arc of totalitarianism in Canada for about the last 8 years and perhaps before that. Authoritarianism and totalitarianism build over time, sometimes with legislation and with political acts. So, for example, we have recently Bill C-18 and Bill C-11, which are really resulting in the CRT, controlling information in Canada. We've had Bill C-36 in BC, but we've also had suppression of independent media. There's been an attempt to rewrite our history or erase it. There's definitely an anti-conservative and anti-Christian sentiment that's being pushed out into the public and is taking over various institutions. And just the general pushing of the woke LGBTQ2 plus A, I had to memorize what that was, agenda in schools and in society. So what's happening in Canada is that we're seeing the advent of a soft totalitarianism. And Dreher mentions that in the book. And I'm going to read to you his definition of it on page 15. Under soft totalitarianism, the media, academia, corporate America, or we could say Canada, and other institutions are practicing newspeak. That's a term from George Orwell's book, 1984, and compelling us to think and double think every day. Men have periods. The woman standing in front of you is to be called he. Diversity and inclusion actually means excluding those who object to ideological uniformity. And this is happening on a rapidly accelerating level in our society. So we need ways to practically resist this. I'm going to present 4 strategies. After I'm done, as Mike said, my colleague and friend Rick Higgins will present some more. Before I do that, I want to stress the need for us to form communities and networks of resistance. And if you've already read the book, you know this, but if you haven't read it, Rod Dreher recommends the forming of communities and networks of resistance while we can still do so, and before totalitarianism reaches the stage where those networks will be either difficult or impossible to achieve. On page 180, he quotes Zofia Romaskiwa, a Polish activist who was one of the key members of the Solidarity movement. And she said, as I see this, as I see it, this is the core, this is the essence of everything right now, forming these communities and networks of communities. So I see that as happening in Canada right now. Groups are getting together and forming, for example, parental rights organizations and other forms of informal and formal networks of resistance. But it's important for us to keep that going. So the first strategy I'm going to talk about is how you can act overtly. We're still able to do that. There hasn't been a repression to the point where we can't overtly protest. And I want to recommend that we write letters. The written word is extremely important. And I want to personalize this by saying that that I've had dozens of letters printed since 2016, mostly in the black press, newspapers in the Cowichan Valley area. And the effect has actually been wide-ranging. I've reached hundreds of people. People have also said to me, oh, good letter that you wrote, or you're the guy who writes letters. And I don't know the full extent of this. It could actually have been more than hundreds. It could have been a few thousand. And doing that, I inadvertently became the voice of conservative values, protesting the CBC, defending Christianity, and so on and so forth. But not all my letters are accepted. A certain percentage of them are, I think a majority of them are, but some of them are rejected. It doesn't matter, because if they're not printed in print, they're printed in the e-section of newspapers, and people read them there and comment on them. The letters don't have to be perfect or necessarily eloquent or articulate, just writing them. I've watched letters being printed that are not like that, but just write. And another thing we can do overtly is to participate in boycotts and boycotts. And the recent boycotting of Bud Light and Target has been devastatingly effective. I see this as the people uniting against wokeism and ideological tyranny. And we should all follow this example, either overtly or in a way that we stop buying from companies that don't reflect our values. So personally, I'll never buy from Gillette ever again. I'll never buy an Anheuser-Busch product, Bud Light, ever again. I won't watch a Disney movie ever again. So that's a way for me to boycott those companies that are pushing wokeism and not the beliefs that I believe. So economically and socially, these can be devastating and powerful, and they can give the message that we're not going to accept these totalitarian ideologies. You can also buy from alternative companies, and what's called the parallel economy. It's developing at this very moment. And one organization in the United States that specializes in this is publicsquare.com. They provide alternatives for you to buy from companies that aren't woke in their values. And of course, there are all these standbys we know from previous years, like you can sign petitions, write to your MLA or MP about issues you care about, join in peaceful demonstrations that support your beliefs. And Dreher writes about this when he talks about the candlelight demonstrations in 1989. People had formed networks and they were ready to act overtly, and that brought down the governments of Eastern Europe at that time. The second thing is that you can act covertly. You can practice non-participation. On page 98, Dreher mentions Václav Havel, a man who was a Czech dissident and eventually became the president of Czechoslovakia. He has the narrative of a shopkeeper who won't put up the sign, "Workers of the world unite." He will not participate in communism. So by his non-participation, he's adding to the struggle. So on chapter 5, page 98, he says, by breaking the rules, he has disrupted the game as such. He has upset the power structure by tearing apart what holds it together. He has demonstrated that living a lie is living a lie. So we can withdraw from things we don't agree with. We can withdraw from participating in things we don't believe in, and or institutions or companies that don't reflect them. So personally, an example of this for me, non-participation, is I'm going to take money that I have in the Toronto Dominion Bank out and put it in some other agency. The Toronto Dominion Bank is a heavily woke corporation, and they recently said that LGBTQ rights and pride campaign should go all year long, but those aren't my values. I refuse to use politically correct and woke terminology, so I'm not going to call someone a partner or a spouse or husband or wife to me. So by withdrawing like this, I think I'm adding to the struggle and making it clear that I don't agree with their values. The third thing you can do is preserve cultural memory. Dreher talks about this in the book. You can save books, symbols, movies, and music from the past and share them with people. So on page 113, he mentions a collective loss of historical memory. The memory of our shared cultural past within the West is bound to have a devastating effect on our future, and I think it already is. For those of us who don't know, Heritage Ministry and Parks Canada are already doing this. They're memory holding our history. They're working to erase our history and symbols to save it from colonialism, the pat phrase they use for this. So, for example, 205 monuments have been purged or rewritten from our parks. And these are people like Johnny MacDonald, statues of Johnny MacDonald, plaques that explain him. The red ensign was declared a racist flag by Heritage Minister Ahmed Hussein in a government publication that was distributed to the schools. Well, that's the flag my father fought under in World War II, and it's the flag my grandfather fought under in World War I. So it's part of our history. It doesn't deserve to be memory hold, and we need to resist that. Statues have been torn down by the mob. I'm sure you all know that. No one's been prosecuted, and statues, or a few people have been prosecuted, and statues have not been restored. The names of universities have been changed arbitrarily. People have not agreed to that. They have not necessarily wanted that. Ryerson University became Toronto Metropolitan University. Here, that's an infamous example because the statue was torn down and activists insisted upon it. And also Confederation Bridge in the Maritimes is renamed with an Indigenous name. Bridges and highways are being renamed constantly. The government arbitrarily changed the coat of arms of Canada. I don't know if people know about this, but they said they wanted to remove religious symbols from it. But what they really meant was just the orb and the cross that's in the actual coat of arms. They replaced that with a maple leaf. Well, there was no plebiscite for this, no desire for the people to necessarily do this, but they did it anyway. So what can you do? One thing you can do is save old books about Canada and share them, and teach your children Canadian history from these books and texts. So go to old bookstores and find these books and save them from potential censorship in the future. This is an idea that's also being practiced around the world in places like the UK, where people are grabbing original editions of books so that those books will not disappear. You can also save DVDs of old movies and old music. And all of these can be censored or forbidden in the near future. What they're doing now is reimagining or remaking old movies, right? And they're putting DEI values into those movies: diversity, equity, inclusion. Series are being made that are historically inaccurate, but include people who would never have been there in the past. So people are, tend to believe these kinds of things. And this becomes the official history, even though it's completely false. Another thing you can do is save classical books in their original form. In the UK right now, I don't know about other countries, but they have something called sensitivity readers. We're going through books and rewriting them, and then the publishing companies are bringing out the new versions of this. And these are established authors like children's author Roald Dahl or P.G. Wodehouse. They're completely rewriting them. This is the thing that authoritarian governments do or totalitarian governments do. It's not acceptable. So by keeping these books, reading them, and showing them to others, you preserve your culture for a time when it can be restored again. The last strategy is to observe traditional holidays and customs, to preserve our culture and protect it from the culture of lies. We don't want these holidays memory hold or our history destroyed. And Dreher talks about engaging less formal but still powerful acts. On page 127, he mentions observing holidays and festivals, holding dances, learning and teaching traditional cooking. And this is a way that a culture that's under attack preserves itself. This is what was done in the Eastern Bloc. And it's a very interesting fact that you don't have to do something necessarily overt to keep the culture going. And these are less formal everyday acts within the home. So I think that this plays itself out in things like teaching children manners. I was a high school teacher for 20 years. That's a rare thing from time to time to see that. And saying grace before meals, praying with your children at the end of the day, if you're so inclined to do so. These are cultural acts that need to be carried on. And I also believe things like overtly and enthusiastically observing holidays like Christmas and Easter. When I was a high school teacher, students didn't have any idea what Easter was all about. Putting up Christmas lights and decorations, saying Merry Christmas, not Happy Holidays. Putting out an outdoor nativity scene. I do this every year, my wife and I. And so the people going by know that we know the meaning of Christmas. We have English customs that are home because we have a connection with England, and we are English Canadians. So we eat English food on the appropriate occasions, told the whole of Christmas, that kind of thing. Dreher talks about this training parents and children alike in cultural memory. So it's an important thing to do. So we can go through those four strategies, from overt actions to more covert actions to the everyday things you do as a form of preserving the culture, preventing totalitarianism from taking root, and working against this increased authoritarianism that's happening in all the countries of the Western world, but especially in Canada. We don't have a good reputation right now. In fact, there was Nathan Pawlowski, the son of Pastor Artur Pawlowski, went to the EU Parliament and gave a speech. There was a standing ovation for him. People are considering Canada to be a country of oppression. And by carrying out the strategies I've talked about and the ones Rick is going to talk about, we can prevent that. I'll leave you with the last quote from page 127 of the book. Dreher says, "We may not be able to communicate meaning to a world gone insane, but as Orwell knew, simply by staying sane when everyone else is mad, we may hope to convey the human heritage." We're not used to oppression like this in our history. We tend to think of ourselves as purely democratic countries that respect in every way human rights and the democratic tradition. But what's happening is that's being chipped away at. And the most frightening thing for me is the idea of memory holding something. Once it's gone, part of it will be gone. So don't allow that to happen. So that's my 15 minutes.
All right, thank you so much, Perry. As you were speaking, what really struck me was the intensely practical aspects of what you were sharing and what Dreher also shares in his book. This is highly doable stuff. It's stuff that we might not even think about, but it's something that we can do and start to make part of our everyday living and breathing. So thank you for your presentation. And now I'd like to introduce Rick Higgins to you for his presentation. So Rick, go right ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Rick Higgins, and I'm pleased to be a member of this Board of Freedom Defense Canada. This book, Live Not by Lies, A Manual for Christian Dissidents by Rod Dreher, affected me profoundly. That is not the kind of a book that you can read once and tuck it away in your library. It is a book that stirs you, challenges you, and beckons you to take action, to do something. You may sit there tonight and think, well, I'm only one person. What can I do? Well, I know the name of a person who changed the world 2,000 years ago, and he was one person. His name was Jesus Christ. So we can do something. So this evening, I would like to share a few thoughts around 3 topics related to the book. These will be hopefully helpful and compel you to become a participator, not a spectator. These 3 areas can be viewed as opportunities for us all to make a difference. I really do not expect things in Canada to suddenly go back to the way they were when I was a boy, nor even when I was a young man. I do, however, have hope that line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, we will start to turn back in that direction. The 1960s brought in the sexual revolution, following hard on the heels of the God is Dead movement, in which Friedrich Nietzsche was lionized for his writings and philosophical candor. Who said, when God and Judeo-Christian principles are erased and a new generation of people, including Canadians, are exposed to the present society, chaos and immorality become the norm. As dissenters, those who know or once knew a life with structure, purpose, and meaning, we must push back. The symbol of our national identity is not a multicolored rag, but a red and white flag. We can proclaim our pride in this country by displaying the flag on our home on Canada Day and by walking the flag on overpasses, which has been happening daily on the Wellington overpass in Nanaimo for well over 1 year now. It's encouraging when you do this to hear a honk and see a thumbs up from drivers and passengers. It's also perplexing to hear a honk and see a thumbs down or an angry F you shouted from an open window. My wife and I have window flags on our vehicles, and we also get a mixed reaction, though mostly favorable. It's sad that overt national pride is on its deathbed in Canada. I was called a fascist last week while getting in my car in a parking lot, simply for displaying a flag in my rear window. I felt truly sorry for the gentleman whom I tried to have a discussion with. He doesn't recognize that those of us who carry the flag have no other motivation than to reclaim all freedoms for all Canadians. These simple acts demonstrate our hope for a Canada that once was, a Canada that was free, democratic, moral, structured, and truthful. Jeremiah the prophet has these wonderful words to say. Thus says the Lord, stand ye in the ways and see, and ask for the old paths. Where is the good way? And walk therein, and you shall find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein. We can join in actions and activities, meetings, webinars, protests for a return to the old values, the better Canada, by associating with other groups and other people who likewise share our values. Action for Canada, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, We Unify, are a few of the organizations we can stand alongside who share our values for freedom and are active in its pursuit. Recently, We Unify hosted a 3-day conference in Victoria titled the Reclaiming Canada Conference. It was a wonderful time to learn strategies for action, to hear well-known speakers in the broader freedom movement, and to make new connections and reaffirm old ones. To me, it was a very encouraging time. And we all need to find our people and be strengthened by those things which unite us. As well as these groups, there are also media platforms such as True North, Rebel News, Western Standard, which have proven to be informative, honest, and committed to factual analysis. Second, the family. As the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live, Pope John Paul II has said. Václav Benda, a father of 6 children, believed that the family was the bedrock of civilization and must be nurtured and protected at all costs. The family is a bulwark against evil, enjoying mutual protection and attending to mutual warfare is a place that we can call home. I live in a house, as do many of you. However, as the patriarch of my family, I am compelled to make that house a home. My own blood flows in the veins of my 2 adult children and that of my grandson. My grandson was recently asked by his teacher, how many members are in your family, Kaylin? And he replied 6, although his actual family was 3. I'm privileged, truly privileged, to have my entire family living only minutes from one another. We're up to date on the events, the joys, the concerns, the anxieties in each other's lives without smothering one another. We pay attention to the need for individual privacy and space. But it is important to nurture your own family culture and traditions. We must develop and burnish our own family identities, something that sets us apart from other families. Well, in our home, we make supper time a special event. We always have a candle or flowers on the table. We take turns blessing the food. Conversation around the dinner table is encouraged, and sometimes viewpoints can collide. But it is a stimulating time and welcomed, and a time to remember that God has given us 1 mouth, 2 ears. Another indication or way that we found agreement and come to make a special union as a family is through Tofino. Well, Tofino's been a special place for me to come and unwind for many years. And now the love of the West Coast has been passed on to my children. We try to go there at least twice a year and stay for as long as we can. It has become a place with many memories for us as a family. So what was mine has now, by the grace of God, become ours. Christmas in our family is also a special time. We open stocking stuffers, eat a delicious wife-saver breakfast, and then return to the Christmas tree to open our presents. But in our home, it takes us an awfully long time because we take turns opening our presents, taking pleasure in watching to see what the other person has received. We actively play games on our front lawn in the summer and board games when the rain begins to fall. We cheer and challenge each other while making the most of our time together. My grandson, who is now 13, made a remarkable statement 2 weeks ago. He was in the front lawn. We were sitting there under the shade of the umbrella, and he said, Grammy, this place feels like a sanctuary. We just felt so blessed So we're not a family that just plays together, but we share ideas, thoughts. We ask questions about scripture and events in the Bible. We have good conversations as well as God conversations, and we do our best to have an attitude of gratitude. A family must be joined at the heart like marriage. It takes effort, humility, grace, and love to survive the onslaught against it. Christ must be at the center, and the Bible our guide. Small groups can be a pastoral lifeline, another statement from Rod Dreher. In my humble opinion, the Christian church in Canada has become benign as an effective instrument against the political actions and policies and the woke ideology of today. She still maintains an evangelicalism among specific denominational groups, but in terms of affecting the downward trajectory of morality and societal collapse, she has been weighed in the balance and found wanting. The Gospel of Matthew's several references to salt that has become bland is a warning that while people are celebrating inside their churches, there are many who have little or nothing to rejoice in. Pastors all over in America canceled Sunday morning services as the state demanded when the so-called pandemic happened. The few pastors that continued to hold church services were harassed or physically put in jail. Some, perhaps many pastors, would say they did this because there is a separation of church and state. There's no biblical prescription for this, nor is there any constitutional validity for this action, but it is something that Western churches hold to. I've wondered in my mind, what would happen in the small city of Nanaimo where I live if all the pastors got together and said, we're not canceling our Sunday services? Because if ever there was a need for comfort and prayer, it was then, and it is now. A potential scriptural principle can be found, not surprisingly, from the book of Proverbs. In chapter 27 and verse 17, it says, as iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. It surely is in the heart of God that holding each other accountable is part of the process of developing brotherhood. The very nature and purpose of small groups is to develop an intimate bond. It's a place where we learn, grow, and trust one another. Pastor Yuri Sipko, a Baptist pastor living under Russian communism, had this to say. Then they took their houses of prayer. Then at that point, they began the practice of small groups. People who lived close to one another would gather in small groups. There was no formal structure of pastors or deacons. There were just brothers and sisters who read the Bible together, prayed together, and sang. It's my privilege and pleasure to lead a small group that we call The Gathering. I'm often asked, what is it you do? Is it a home group? Is it a house group? Is it a care group? Are you planning a home church? What is it? Well, it's not about a title that describes who we are, but crucially describes what we do. We gather. Once every 2 weeks on a Sunday evening, we come together in my home to do exactly what Pastor Sipko was speaking about. We're not exclusive, but inclusive. We've been gathering now for nearly 7 years, and what started out as an uncomfortable get-together of a group of people who really did not know one another has become an intimate, loving, and comfortable fellowship. As the leader of the group, my leadership style would be one of simple facilitation. When we came together those 7 years ago for the first time, sitting in a circle, not just everybody facing frontwards, we're feeling a little uncomfortable. I shared a vision with the friends who were there, and I said, I feel that the Lord is saying to us, I want you to draw out what I have put in. So in other words, what is God saying to me through you? And what is God saying to you through me? We're all participators in this great movement called the Kingdom of Christ Jesus. We all have something to contribute, and there's none greater than the King himself. So in our situation, we take turns coming up with a topic that we'd like to discuss. People that were hesitant and indrawn and shy about facilitating a particular discussion now feel comfortable to do so. and are able to do so, frankly, with excellence. We're all united and up to date on what is happening in this woke world. We share video clips, sermons, information regarding what is happening. I believe we're becoming well prepared for what will come upon us next. In a small group, there is no hiding out. If someone needs help, we are there for them. From a group largely independent, we have relinquished self-control willingly and with great rejoicing to become a people who are interdependent. As we develop in our relationships with one another, we're all aware of our great need to have a growing and deep relationship with Christ. Through others' perspectives and viewpoints and understanding of Scripture, we have a deeper understanding of who our King is. And I've come to know him in a deeper way through listening to the words and hearts of those in our gathering. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Rick. And I hope everyone can hear me. Just unmuted myself. So we're now entering the question and answer period of the event. So we'd like you to continue to keep your mics muted. We're going to use the chat box for your questions. And depending on the number of questions I have, I will sometimes combine them into one question just for clarity's purposes. If the questioning goes well, we'll allow ourselves to have open mic. Okay, and any questions out there? I'm just going to check the chat box now. Yes, we have a question here, and it is from Mike and Bev. It is so easy to see those pushing evil ideologies as the enemy and simply hate them. What are your thoughts on how we keep ourselves from becoming hateful of those who stand against all that is good and right? So I'm not sure which of the two of us this was directed at, but I'm going to pass that particular question over to Rick. Okay.
The Bible clearly tells us to love those that hate and despise you. It is not an easy thing to do. I've had a situation in my life many years ago, something happened to me. It was very, very unfair. And for the first few weeks, I got down with gritted teeth and bless him, Jesus, bless them, Lord, because in my heart, I despise them. And then I found about 2 or 3 weeks later, all of a sudden, I was praying with a heart of compassion. And then I had to say to God, no, I take it back. I don't mean it. So I think we step in and do what the Scripture tells us to do, and let God assuage and bless our heart to change a place from hatred and despising people to actually caring and loving them. And he can do that.
Okay, there are no other questions in the box right now. I encourage people to submit a wide range of questions, and especially I think about the practical aspects that are in Rod Dreher's book about resisting. I neglected to mention a couple of things that I was going to put in the presentation that I did. It's only 15 minutes long. One of them was that, as Rick mentioned, we celebrate Canada Day in a big way here in our actual neighborhood. We are one of the few people who really deck the entire house out in flags and so on. But I think that overt demonstration of patriotism is an important part of what we're doing. A lot of people in government positions and in the media and academia are seeming to make this kind of equating between nationalism and Nazism or fascism. It's a bizarre connection, right? Because how can you, why would you, if you are rightfully proud of your country, why would you be considered a Nazi? And yet that's sort of where things are going in some ways, right? I also, in the customs that I was talking about, the things you can do informally, I forgot to mention that I had gone to Jordan Peterson's May 19th event in Victoria, which was a revelatory event for me. First of all, I'm going to write about that in our newsletter. So if you receive the newsletter, which should be coming out at the beginning of August, you'll hear about what happened at the event. It's kind of an interesting microcosm of what's going on. There were a lot of protesters outside protesting Jordan Peterson. Well, actually a small group of a few hundred. they spend most of their time drawing murals on the sidewalk in chalk. But outside the building, there was a young man who's very, very well dressed. He couldn't have been more than 19 or 20 years old. And so as I walked by him, I thought this was kind of unusual. So I said to him, well, you're well dressed for this occasion. And he said, proper occasion, proper dress. So someone had actually taught him in one sense that this was the right thing to do. Jordan Peterson emphasizes this quite a bit, how to present yourself correctly. And I just thought that's a cultural transmission, right? If he's wearing a suit and tie, if he understands that the event is important to him, then the reality of the matter is that he's learned a cultural lesson, and his parents have passed it on to him. And I was very impressed. I told him I was very impressed by him. I met him later in the event, and we both nodded to each other. It was as if we understood something between us. And at that event as well, it was obvious that there was a kind of a cultural transmission taking place. Peterson and the people in the building were trying to also protect their culture and Canada's culture. I think in the wave of the kind of wokeism that we're all experiencing. There's another question here, and I think I will answer this one. Do you see Canada's descent into soft totalitarianism as inevitable? And can you envision a great reversal? Why do you think this? Yeah, I can easily imagine a great reversal. The only thing that will determine the timeline for this will be people's desire to step forward. And this is why it's important that we read Dreher's book, if you don't already have the book, and if you're not already reading it, because what he mentions is that this is a gradual process. The people of Eastern Europe, the people of the Soviet Union, gradually won back their freedom. And it happened in small groups, the kind of small groups that Rick's talking about. Religion was part of it. Small group activity was part of it. And just the ability to step forward. It happened gradually, but we don't have to wait for that gradual process to happen. We can start this by, if I may say so, backing groups like FDC and other groups that are allied to it, the groups that Rick mentioned, and forming small groups of your own. If you know someone who doesn't agree with what's happening, connect with that person, connect them with a larger group. And this is exactly what was mentioned in Rod Dreher's book. They had something called co-ed circles in Poland that were organized by a Catholic priest under the radar of the communist government. By the time it was time for activism in the 1980s, they were everywhere. Okay, and in fact, the communist authorities arrested a Catholic priest and told him, well, you know, you're in trouble. We can make life difficult for you. You've got to stop what you're doing. And he said, well, go ahead, arrest me. Haven't you noticed the things that are going on around you? And the whole concept was that he said, go ahead and arrest me. This system that you have created is crumbling. And I'll be able to know. And a couple of weeks later, this person was negotiating with the communist government for the first free government of Poland. So those small group things, the underground things, and the overt things all lead to some important things that we can do. The next question is, what are some strategies you have found effective for discussing hard subjects like the focus of this book? It seems that part of the difficulty we face is that there is little ability, let alone interest, to disagree respectfully. Rick, do you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Perry. Personally, and where I'm at, I don't intend to back down anymore. If there's a controversial subject and people get really incensed, I'm going to hold to my attitude and my belief because they're mine. They belong to me. I don't intend to offend, but if standing for truth offends people, then so be it. This whole woke movement, you know, you got to be really hypersensitive about other people's feelings. I remember 20 or 30 years ago, you could be violently opposed to what one person was saying and go for dinner, have a beer with them, or go for a walk. And your opinions that was intellectually kind of what you're carrying wasn't necessarily your heart. So the people felt he cares about me. He's building a relationship with me. I just disagree. But now, if there's any disagreement, then you obviously despise that person. No, no, that's not true. But that's what's being presented, and it's become very, very difficult. But I think it's not time for us to back down, because if ever the world needed people who will stand for truth and occasion a difference, it's now.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think we've been conditioned not to offend. I mean, it's not good to be rude, it's not good to be uncivil in one sense, but you're going to be offended in life. And we all knew this before. The letters that I had printed, or that were printed in the Cowichan Valley Citizen, and had immediate responses. They were offensive responses. I just kept writing, and kept getting them in the paper. I had a few phone calls to my home. One of them is offensive, but if the price is that I don't speak because people are offended by me, then I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do what they did in Rod Dreher's book. I'm going to resist in every way I possibly can. Offense is part of life, right? I mean, you're offended by people, people are offended by you. And in fact, just watched a video a few minutes ago that talked about how that's the good thing about democracy. That's the good thing. That clash between ideas, that clash in government, the adversarial aspect of our society and the original Westminster model of parliamentary government, that doesn't exist everywhere. I'm certain it doesn't exist in China. I'm certain it doesn't exist in Cuba or any of the other 6 communist nations. So we have to offend. Don't go trying to offend people, right? I'm not telling you that, but it's necessary that we present our point of view, and that point of view is out there in the public square.
Well, Jesus Christ came to send a sword and a spear. He didn't come with he didn't come with a trowel to slather stuff on you, make you feel good. He came to challenge you.
That wasn't his way of doing things. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Yes, so we're gonna go to open mic. My wife's just reminded me it's time to go to open mic if you wish to. Okay, so I'm gonna put away the chat questions right now. And what would that be? So let's see what we can do here. Yeah, okay, I can see everyone. And if you want to ask a question or make a comment, don't forget, right, to click on the hand icon so we can see you. I'll wait a few minutes. Okay, this is kind of what we're talking about. Okay, we have a raised hand here from Jeremy Smythe. Okay, Jeremy, can you unmute yourself and go ahead?
Here you go. I was writing it down, and then we suddenly switched to open mic, so to speak.
Right.
I'm just wondering if someone could hold up a cover of the book, just so oh yes, I see one behind you, Perry. Thank you.
Yes, that's right. We did.
There we go.
Rick's got one too.
Just so somebody can take a shot of it.
Yeah, good idea. Good idea.
And I can pass one on to friends.
Yeah, that's right. And I know of a person actually who went out and bought 5 copies. I was astonished. Went out and bought 5 copies and distributed it to his friends. He felt it was that important in the book, and I feel it's the same way.
Yeah. One thing I've done is, even if people, like younger people, don't have the money, you can get one from the library for free, then finish reading it and hand it on to them and just ask them to return it. Which leads me to my next question. I've been following a movement in the States where we take back publicly funded civic spaces, particularly libraries, our centers of learning, and we force them, if they object, to our conservative events and readings where we celebrate family, open faith in the public square events. They have a team of lawyers, dedicated, brilliant lawyers, who then demand and essentially sue the publicly funded library, saying, we are the taxpayers as well. You have no grounds to select or discriminate against any group. There's been there's, they show precedents of public libraries doing this. This is happening all over the States right now.
Yeah.
I was hoping we might consider, or we may know of already, other analogous groups in Canada, but I haven't seen them. We've just let them run over and into our library. So I think it's time that we look into this and, number one, has anyone heard of this in Canada? And number two, might we look into, through the Justice Center for Freedoms or some similar legal apparatus, shoehorning our events into public libraries in a visible way to say, no way, these are our libraries too. We are taking them back.
Yes, I agree. And this is actually, it's a way for them to part of cancel culture, right? They don't allow you to have a facility. They don't allow you to speak and so on.
Yeah,
So,
but they're taking our tax dollars. So we have a legal precedent that's spreading throughout North America. So
yeah, no good. I agree with this.
yeah, I just wondered if anyone, or if we had a connection with lawyers for that.
I don't know of any, although I suppose we could ask the JCCF. Someone's made a comment to me, Damaris. One thing people can do is request local bookstores to stock the book. Very good question. Very good point. I didn't think of that. When I go into the local bookstore here in the Duncan area, it's all left-wing books pretty much, right? On the bestsellers section. So very good suggestion for us to do that, right?
You can also request libraries purchase those. I've done that. You can go to the library and then request them purchase, then follow up and say, if you have not purchased this book, I ask that you tell me why not, and your reasons, your list of criteria, why not.
Right. Yeah, I know some groups are using these tactics to get some traction. And for example, Action for Canada always stresses that you should use a notice of liability, right? To send to various organizations or people who are violating your principles or violating the law. And so I think this is the beginning of tactics that we need. I'm cognizant of the fact that we're not used to doing this. We in North America have had a great time since the end of World War II. We're not used to struggle. We're not used to doing these things. And it's time for us to find these strategies and use them. Sometimes there are things like the strategy that Damaris mentioned, just getting those books up and out in the shelf so people can see them, right? Great suggestions. Any more? I don't see another hand right now. So I'm just going to look at where we are in terms of time. And we're at 8:25. So ostensibly the end of the event for all intents and purposes. Does anybody have a last question or a query or anything that you want to say? Jeremy, did you put your hand up?
I did. I'm trying to use my there.
There you go. There's your hand. The icon.
I just wanted to say our church in Chemainus has decided to look at screening programming films that may draw in young people, especially young men.
Yeah.
And so I might be looking for, faithful friends to help bring people to those events, to extend some of the screen time for some of the films that not everybody has seen. So
yeah, sorry, that's a great idea. And I think a lot of people might be aware of the fact that Sound of Freedom, a movie that I saw a few days ago here in Duncan, has just had an overwhelming response across North America. And this is in the face of Indiana Jones 5 and the fact that they only had half the theaters to show the film in that the commercial Hollywood studios had. They still surpassed everything, right? So the reason I was happy about that wasn't a happy film. It was a bit of a depressing film in some ways. But the reason I was happy to see that was because the people had spoken. They'd spoken with their feet and with their wallet. And they had said, we are going to watch these kinds of movies. We are not going to watch the movies you're producing, right? And I think this is the way that we proceed with this, right? They can keep resisting as long as they want, but when it gets into the tens of billions of dollars, that's going to hurt, right? And and the fact of the matter is, that is an example of both covert and overt action that I was talking about. You're not going to this movie. That's the covert action, the non-participation. But you're going to this movie, right? Which is the overt action. I think that the studio that made that movie is going to be prospering in the near future. That's my prediction, right? Because people saw this movie, they saw that it was great, that it didn't have woke propaganda in it, and they'll be looking forward to others from that studio. Okay, we're at oh, one more hand.
That was me again, sorry.
Yeah, you guys don't have to be shy. You can put that icon.
I only asking because publicsquare.com, I typed it in, and I'm just wondering if maybe I have missed something. I can't, it opens up to a township or something, and it may not be what you're wanting.
Yeah, I can send that to you, and I can also make that available to the membership.
Thank you. Okay.
And also, I think people are cluing into this. Forgive me if I've got this wrong, because I know there's a board member who will perhaps correct me, but there's actually an app called Veep. Okay, and I think it's in the UK, and that app will actually, if you take a picture of a product, if I'm not mistaken, that app will tell you about the company that produces the product, and whether it's a woke company or not, and whether or not, in that sense, you can make the choice about whether you're going to buy it or not. So there is a resistance to a lot of the stuff that's going on. We have one more question, and this probably should be directed to Rick. Generally, the churches are noticeably quiet. What's a good way of rallying churches to be more vocal? I have that question too. So Rick, if you can handle that question.
Boy,
it's a big one, I know.
Well, I think only Christ himself or the Holy Spirit can stir them. There's a thing called Soji 123 that is happening in at least 4 provinces now, that started 4 years ago. Out on the West Coast, there was 2 school districts in Nanaimo and 1 school district in Alberta. I went to the meeting and I was gobsmacked. I was shocked. I thought this can't be true. This stuff can't really be happening. I came home, and this is not my domain websites, but I have a website called ourchildrenourchoices.com. So I gathered a bunch of information, hyperlinked it so that it wasn't what I was saying, it was what the school district said, shows exactly where it all came from. I sent it to all the pastors in town and said, I don't have mailing lists for the people in your church, but you do. It's contingent upon you as the leader of your congregation to inform your people that this is happening in public, in at that time, school district 68. Now it's everywhere. Guess how many pastors sent it out from there?
Yeah.
I'm not maligning people. For the life of me, I don't understand why the Christian church would be the biggest group of people that I could talk to and influence. When this happened and they were electing people for the school board, one man, God bless him, stood up and said, let me run. He didn't win, but he tried. I said, let's stand outside the school board at the next school board meeting and protest. How many people? So I am blown away by it. If you want to know how horrible this is, go to ourchildrenourchoices.com. It's absolutely horrific. Do you know that parents legally have no entitlement to know what goes on in the school? In other words, if you have a son, Robert, at home, and he goes to school, he can be Roberta, the school has no obligation to tell the parents. So I don't know. I don't have an answer. I wished I did. I wish I could say more prayer, or like I've tried to encourage people in your churches. Don't put it on him. Don't put it on your pastor or her, whatever sex your pastor might be. Gather some people together and do something.
I'm just going to respond to Petrushka, who has her hand up. But before I do that, I want to mention that again in Dreher's book. Please read the book. He talks about during the time of the Eastern Bloc Soviet domination, both Christians and non-Christians got together, right? So it wasn't only Christians that were spearheading everything. Non-Christians were working with them alongside because they saw the great danger in that. And I think Christians also have to consider themselves to be Canadian citizens.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's a point that has to be made clear to people. You may have this point of view, you may not want to ruffle feathers, but you are a Canadian citizen and you have charter rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, including 2.1, which is the right to free expression. So if you can't think of it from the terms of your faith, think of it in terms of your rights as a citizen. So, Patricia.
Hi, Perry. Thank
Hi,
you.
how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Rick. Almost 5 years ago, we moved here almost 6 years ago, but both Edward and I were involved in teaching, and we were very aware of the SOGI 123 curriculum, saw the evil of it, the dangers. We were in private school, we were in Christian school teaching, but we saw it coming in. And 5 years ago, Edward was allowed an evening in a local church here in Duncan, and he spoke to a group of people, parents, interested people, grandparents, about the dangers of the SOGI 123 curriculum. He sent letters to every school board, every superintendent, private schools, public schools, Catholic schools. He sent letters warning people about what was happening in the public school system. The only people who responded to him were Catholic archbishops from the Catholic school system, thanking him for what he had said.
God
But
bless.
exactly, Bishop Gary in Victoria, he sent a letter, but people were just deaf and dumb to this situation. But parents across Canada now are starting to stand against it.
That's right.
And the New Brunswick Premier is standing against it.
Yes.
There are people, and we need to pray that this will continue, that it will be a ground swell, and this will be heard. Today we read about, and maybe other people know, but today we read about the Justice Institute and what has happened with overturning the ruling that Bonnie Henry had for public gatherings. Maybe some of you have read about that, but there are small glimmers of light. And every night I kneel at my prayer bench, and you know where that is, Perry, and I have a solar light on my table 2 stories down, and there's a faint glimmer, and I think the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overwhelmed it. And thanks be to God, the
Well,
darkness
Yes,
has
yeah.
not overwhelmed.
And thanks for that,
Yeah.
Patricia. And also another aspect of this is I think that, you know, it has to be people who are aware of excesses acting. Like Damaris has also said here, the Muslims have been great for being vocal on these issues. You know, and they're out in the streets demonstrating, because I think this is a point at which ordinary citizens who have no religious affiliation, Christians, Muslims, everyone can see the injustice of this, or can see the terrible irony of this, and they're acting, right? And I think that the woke, like the communists before them, the woke are going too far. They're overreaching. I don't know if you guys know about this, but there was a principal in Ontario. He was, I think, an acting or floating principal. He objected to woke curriculum. They hounded him and harassed him, and he committed suicide. This is all over all the news internationally in the United States and Canada and across the nation. The National Post just wrote about it. So that gives you an idea of the sort of thing we're up against ideologically, right? They will not leave you alone. They will not let you have your point of view. And the writer that I read it in the National Post said, this is a stain on the conscience of Canada that this had to happen. So there is a glimmer of light, not just a glimmer of light, but I think in the parent groups, non-Muslim parent groups as well, in Ontario, are acting as hard, as fast and as hard as they can to turn this around, right? They're getting school board trustees whatever you want, de-officed or kicked out of office. And it's now an issue, right? So we're rising up. Each one of us has to be in this. Okay, and then if we can get a copy of this, someone has just told me, of this Zoom meeting, we can give it to the pastors. So we'll consider doing that, definitely doing that. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our time. Thanks everyone for attending, and thanks for the questions, and thank you for the speculation. I hope you found this rewarding. And at this particular point, we'll go back to Mike, I think.
Okay, thank you, Perry and Rick, for your presentation. It was stimulating and encouraging. Thank you for your responses to questions. And if you have other questions, feel free to contact us on our website, Freedom Defense Canada's website. I think it's important that we all recognize the need to be participants. We have to join groups. We have to be part of connecting with those around us. I think it's also important to realize that we have to reach across lines that we otherwise wouldn't necessarily reach across. So we need to begin now. One of the things that Dreher says in his book continuously is the idea of preparing before it gets bad. He talked continuously about people who saw it coming. They saw communism coming. And in their case, it was a hard totalitarianism, but they saw it coming. And it's important that we, as we look down the road, recognize where we're going and prepare before we get there. So let's join groups, let's join hands with people around us. Let's begin to make good habits by joining with others and encouraging others to do the same, because this will serve us well in the difficult days to come. And a comment that was brought up at one of our meetings with the board recently was this very simple statement that we should all remember, and that is this: small acts are powerful. We're not asking you to start a company or to overtake a nation, or what we're saying is join with your neighbor, pray with a friend, create a group, get together and uphold Canadian history, observe traditions. Many of the things that Perry and Rick talked about, they're actually very practical, very straightforward, and they're very easily put into practice. So I encourage you to do that. And as we come to a close, as a board, we'd like to encourage and challenge you to do two very practical things for Freedom Defense Canada. First of all, please go to our Facebook page and like, comment, and share on the posts you find there. And secondly, go to Freedom Defense Canada's website and comment on the latest blog posts there. As we join our voices together, more people will be made aware of the work we're doing and the work that others are doing, and they will join, and we will have a greater voice and a greater force as we move into the days ahead. So with that, I'd like to close. Once again, thank you for all attending. We appreciate each one of you for being part of this, and we trust the presentation was helpful and encouraging. Thank you for your ongoing support of FDC, and we look forward to other opportunities to join with you in the future. So from the board of Freedom Defense Canada, God bless you and good night to each one of you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, guys.